5 deaths, 5 official rulings, and families who refuse to believe the truth. Were these suicides or carefully staged murders? In July 2011, 32-year-old Rebecca Zahau was found hanging naked from a second-floor balcony at the Spreckles Mansion in Coronado, California, just 2 days after her boyfriend's 6-year-old son suffered a devastating fall inside the same home. The official ruling? Suicide. Investigators said Rebecca, overwhelmed with guilt over the child's accident, bound her own hands and feet, gagged herself, tied a rope to the bed frame, climbed over the 3-foot balcony railing, and hung herself. They found no foreign DNA at the scene, only Rebecca's. But her family has always said that explanation doesn't make sense. When Rebecca was discovered, she was fully suspended from the balcony, wrists and ankles bound behind her back with complex knots. A blue shirt had been stuffed into her mouth as a gag, and written in black paint on the bedroom door was a cryptic message. "She saved him. Can you save her?" Investigators said Rebecca wrote the message herself. Her thumbprint was found on the paint tube, and the same paint appeared on parts of her body. But her family argues the scene looked staged. Then there are the injuries. The San Diego medical examiner concluded her neck injuries, including a fractured hyoid and thyroid cartilage, were consistent with hanging, but a private autopsy disagreed. That forensic pathologist believed some of her neck injuries were more consistent with strangulation, and that she may have been dead or dying before going over the balcony. There were also 4 distinct hemorrhages on the top of her scalp. Investigators said they were caused by her hitting tree branches during the fall. He argued they were consistent with blunt force trauma, not a vertical drop. And then there's what wasn't found. Rebecca's boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, was the only other person at the property that morning. He cut her down and reportedly performed life-saving measures. Yet investigators found no trace of his genetic profile on her body. Authorities say absence of biological material isn't evidence of homicide. Her family says it suggests the scene was cleaned. In 2018, a civil jury found Adam Shacknai responsible for her death in a wrongful death lawsuit. He has always denied involvement, and he was never criminally charged. To this day, Rebecca's manner of death remains officially ruled a suicide. But the debate over what happened on that balcony has never gone away. And Rebecca's case isn't the only one where the official ruling has been fiercely debated. Just months before her death, another young woman was found inside her own home, in a case that investigators also ruled a suicide. But when you look at the forensic details, the questions only grow louder. This is the case of Ellen Greenberg. In January 2011, 27-year-old elementary school teacher Ellen Greenberg was found dead on the kitchen floor of her Philadelphia apartment. She had been stabbed 20 times. The official ruling? Suicide. That conclusion didn't come immediately. In fact, the medical examiner first ruled her death a homicide. But after police reviewed the scene, and after consulting what they described as a neuropathology evaluation, her manner of death was changed to suicide. Here's what investigators relied on. The apartment door was secured from the inside with a swing bar lock. Surveillance cameras showed no one entering or leaving except her fiancé, who had gone to the gym downstairs. The balcony was undisturbed by snow. There were no signs of forced entry. No defensive wounds on Ellen's hands, and the knife embedded in her chest contained only her genetic profile. Police believed Ellen, who had recently been prescribed medication for anxiety, locked herself inside and inflicted the wounds. But the injuries are what continue to divide experts. Ellen had 8 stab wounds to her chest, 1 to her abdomen, a slash to her scalp, and 10 stab wounds to the back of her neck. 2 of those neck wounds were approximately 3 inches deep. Suicides by stabbing are rare. Multiple deep stab wounds, especially to the back of the neck, are even rarer. Police argued that some of the smaller wounds were hesitation marks. They also claimed a neuropathologist determined Ellen's spinal cord was intact, meaning she could have continued stabbing herself. But years later, when attorneys requested documentation of that neuropathology exam, no written report could be found. The doctor who was said to have performed it stated she had no memory of the case and no record of conducting the exam. Independent experts hired by Ellen's family later examined preserved spinal tissue and concluded at least 1 neck wound would likely have caused immediate neurological impairment, making it nearly impossible for her to continue attacking herself. There were other questions too. A clean white towel was found in her hand with no blood on it, and photographs showed blood flowing horizontally across her face, something critics argue doesn't align with the position police say her body was found in. In 2019, authorities revealed that searches for suicide methods had been made on Ellen's computer weeks before her death. Her parents dispute the interpretation of that evidence and continue to fight for the manner of death to be changed. As of today, Ellen Greenberg's death remains officially ruled a suicide. But more than a decade later, the debate over whether this was self-inflicted or something else entirely continues. Ellen Greenberg's case raises questions about how a death inside a locked apartment can still divide experts more than a decade later. But sometimes the setting isn't a quiet high-rise. Sometimes it's a house full of people. And in the next case, a woman attended what should have been a normal sleepover with friends and never made it home. This is the case of Tamla Horsford. It was supposed to be a fun, low-key night, a birthday sleepover for a group of football moms in Forsyth County, Georgia. By the next morning, 40-year-old Tamla was dead. On November 4th, 2018, Tamla was found face down in the backyard of the home where the party took place, below an elevated deck. Investigators quickly concluded it was an accident, a fall after a night of drinking. But almost immediately, her death raised serious questions. Tamla was the only Black woman at the gathering, and before investigators even fully assessed the scene, the narrative seemed to form quickly. On the call to police, the homeowner's boyfriend suggested she had been drinking and maybe fell off the balcony. When deputies arrived, Tamla had visible injuries, including trauma to her face and limbs, and one arm was described as being at an unnatural angle. Yet, despite the unusual circumstances, the early investigation was widely criticized for what wasn't done. No forensic pathologist was called to the scene, no fingernail swabs, no hands bagged, no shoe print impressions documented, and no rape kit performed. Meanwhile, people inside the home were still moving around, and some reports indicate the house was being cleaned up before investigators arrived, raising concerns about contamination and lost evidence. The autopsy later determined Tamla died from multiple blunt force injuries, and her death was ruled an accident. Toxicology showed a high blood alcohol level along with marijuana, substances authorities believed could have affected her balance. But critics point to the severity of her injuries, including internal trauma, and argue they don't neatly fit a straightforward 14-foot fall. There were also lingering questions about the timeline that night. The last confirmed sightings placed Tamla awake in the early morning hours, and a home security system recorded door activity around 2 a.m. After that, nothing, until her body was discovered around 9 a.m. In 2020, after public pressure and renewed attention, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation re-examined the case. In 2021, they announced the same conclusion. They found no evidence of foul play and stood by accidental fall. But for her family, and for many who have reviewed the gaps in the early investigation, the question hasn't gone away. Was this truly a tragic fall? Or was something missed before the case was ever fully treated like a potential crime scene? Tamla's death was ruled an accident, despite the questions that still surround how the investigation was handled. But sometimes the controversy isn't about who was inside the house. Sometimes it's about whether the physical mechanics of a death even make sense. And in the next case, a young woman was found inside something most people would never imagine. This is the case of Phoebe Handsjuk. On December 2nd, 2010, staff at a luxury high-rise apartment building in Australia made a horrifying discovery in the building's trash room. What they first thought was a mannequin was actually the body of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk. She was found at the bottom of the building's trash chute, lying in a pool of blood near the compactor. One of her legs had been so severely injured, it was nearly amputated. Her jeans were pulled down to her knees. Phoebe lived in the building with her 40-year-old boyfriend, Anthony Hampel. Investigators quickly determined that Phoebe had fallen 12 stories, roughly 30 meters, down the narrow trash chute from the 12th floor. The question was, how did she get in there? Police ruled out homicide within days. The coroner ultimately concluded her death was a tragic accident, possibly occurring in a sleepwalking state under the influence of alcohol in the prescription sleep medication Stilnox. Toxicology showed a blood alcohol level of 0.16, along with prescription drugs in her system. Authorities theorized Phoebe climbed into the chute herself, went down feet first, survived the fall, and then died from blood loss after striking the compactor. But the physical mechanics have troubled her family for years. The chute opening was extremely small, about 37 centimeters by 22 centimeters, and positioned about a meter off the ground. The door had to be held open manually while climbing in. To enter feet first, Phoebe would have had to lift herself up, hold the door open against her back, and maneuver both legs into a tight metal opening, all while heavily intoxicated. Yet investigators found no usable fingerprints on the chute door. Not Phoebe's, not anyone else's. Then there were her jeans. They were pulled down to her knees when her body was discovered, but her belt was still intact and threaded through the loops. Her family questions how her pants could have come down during a vertical fall without breaking the belt or loops. Inside the apartment, there were also unexplained details, broken glass and small blood smears on a desk, but no clear evidence tying those to the chute itself. Phoebe's family conducted their own physical reconstruction and argued that even a sober person struggled to replicate climbing into the chute the way police described. After a formal inquest in 2014, the coroner reaffirmed the ruling: not suicide, not murder, but accident. More than a decade later, Phoebe Handsjuk's death remains officially classified as a tragic accident. But the core question still lingers. Could someone realistically climb into a 12-story trash chute on their own, under the influence, and leave behind no fingerprints? Or was something critical overlooked? Phoebe's case leaves us asking whether something physically improbable was written off too quickly. But not every controversial death happens in a high-rise or inside a trash chute. Sometimes it happens inside a home with people who knew the victim best. And in the next case, a 21-year-old man was found dead from a gunshot wound. Investigators ruled it a suicide. His family says it was murder. This is the case of Christian Andreacchio. Christian was 21 years old in February 2014. He was a tugboat worker from Mississippi with big ambitions. He wanted to become the youngest captain at the marina where he worked, and by all accounts, he was on track to get there. He had a steady income, his own apartment, and a future his family believed was bright. But on February 26, 2014, Christian was found dead in his upstairs bathroom from a single gunshot wound to the head. Police ruled it a suicide within about 45 minutes. Christian's parents say that decision came far too quickly. That morning, Christian had returned home early from a work trip after learning his girlfriend, 17-year-old Whitley Goodman, had been driving his car and spending time with people he didn't trust. He arrived at his apartment around 11:30 a.m. with his friend Dylan Swearingen. At some point that afternoon, Dylan left to get food. Around 4 p.m., police were called. When officers arrived, they found Christian kneeling beside the bathtub, slumped forward. A .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun was located near his left thigh. Christian was right-handed. The entrance wound was to his right temple. Both Whitley and Dylan tested positive for gunshot residue. So did Christian, but residue was reportedly found on only one of his hands. There were other details that troubled the family. Dylan had been captured on bank surveillance earlier that day, attempting to withdraw money from Christian's bank account. He told police Christian had given him permission. Whitley initially denied having Christian's cell phone, but later produced it from her purse when questioned. An independent forensic pathologist later reviewed the case at the family's request and argued that aspects of the scene didn't align with a self-inflicted gunshot. Questions were raised about the gun's position, the state of the firearm, the bullet's trajectory, and whether lividity and rigor mortis suggested a longer post-mortem interval than reported. The original coroner listed the manner of death as undetermined. The medical examiner later ruled it a suicide. In the years since, there have been renewed reviews, public campaigns, and legal disputes. Arrest warrants were reportedly issued at one point, but were never executed. No one has ever been charged in Christian's death. Today, his death remains officially ruled a suicide, but his family continues to argue that the forensic evidence tells a different story. And like the other cases in this video, the debate centers on one question. Was the scene interpreted correctly, or was the conclusion reached too quickly? These are just condensed overviews of each case. If you want the full timelines, the complete forensic breakdowns, and every detail that didn't make it into this video, you can listen to the full episodes on Forensic Tales. I release new cases every week, all focused on the forensic evidence behind real investigations. Make sure you subscribe here on YouTube and follow Forensic Tales wherever you listen to podcasts.